The following is paid advertisement and does not reflect the opinions of this station. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. The information presented in this program is general and is not intended to be legal advice and should not be relied upon or used without consulting a lawyer to consider your specific circumstances.
Questions about law, stories from the courtroom, cases that might impact your life. It's time for Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn from Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolves. Find them at cbpw-law.com. Here's Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn.
Good morning and welcome to Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we invite you to take another look at the world of personal injury law. I'm attorney Matt Glenn. I'm a partner at Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolves. Alongside me is my partner Dan Grimm. Dan, how you doing today?
Good. Any plans for the weekend?
Plans for the weekend? Man, well, no, none. I'm going to do nothing.
That's good.
It's one of the few things I feel like I'm overqualified for.
You're doing it well.
It's some say my natural state.
Right.
No, we've just done a few house renovations. We've moved into a new home, and so we're in the process of unpacking, which I anticipate will last well into the next presidential administration. So
take it slow and easy, baby steps.
That's all we can do. How about yourself?
Same thing. No, we're planning on going down to. We got a kid down in Mississippi State, just he's freshman down there, so we're going to go down there and visit him and see what we can do to take in the town of Starkville, Mississippi.
Wow. Well, after that 15 minutes, let me know what else you do.
Right, I hear you.
So today we're going to talk about damages in the context of an injury case, and specifically non-economic damages. And what do we mean by that? Well, everybody can wrap their brain around an economic loss. If you have a car that you just paid $10,000 for, and somebody hits it and it's no longer usable, they owe you $10,000. Similarly, if you break your wrist in an accident and it cost you $10,000 for the doctor to fix it, that's an economic loss. The time you miss from work is an economic loss. Those damages are incredibly easy to calculate, but non-economic damages are often the largest part of any injury claim, and those are really at their core how your life has changed. So when you think of non-economic damages, Dan, what does that conjure in your mind?
Sure. One way we always frame it or think about it is human losses. Like you said, medical bills, wage loss, those are economic loss and something you simply can hand somebody a calculator and total up. Non-economic losses are the human losses that really affect you as a human being, what's taken from you by way of health, enjoyment, loss of quality of life. And those things are more like intangible losses that only 12 jurors can appraise. And one of the things that they're required to do if it goes to jury trial, and I printed out essentially what the jury's charged with as far as instruction on damages.
Right. So yeah, for those of you at home, anytime there's a civil jury trial, before the jury goes in to deliberate their verdict, the judge essentially gives them a set of instructions or the rules that they're supposed to use to reach their verdict. And which one do you have, Dan?
So it's MAI 37.03, and in part it reads, when the judge is reading to the jury, you must determine the total amount of plaintiff's damages to be such sum as will fairly and justly compensate the plaintiff for any such damages you believe that a plaintiff sustained and is reasonably certain to sustain in the future that the occurrence mentioned in the evidence directly caused or directly contributed to cause. You must state such total amount of plaintiff's damages in your verdict. And they're using the term damages. And when we talk about damages, it could be past medical expenses, future medical expenses, past and future wage loss, also non-economic damages, which we're talking about today, which is pain, suffering, loss of quality of life. Those are the human losses that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. And to me, we're getting into the realm really of almost philosophy, or perhaps even for somebody like me who's been raised to be a Christian, it can be a religious question to me. This is really dealing with your humanity and who you are as an individual, what makes you you. When people ask me who are you, I say, well, I am a lawyer, right? I do this for a living, but I say I am a lawyer. It's a matter of identity. And a lot of times we'll see injuries that, they change who you are as a person. They change your identity, and that has an impact on your ability to relate to your family, your ability to relate to your coworkers, how you may relate to people in your church if that's where you go. It can impact every different part of your life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, whether or not you have limitations because of your injuries or pain, suffering, loss of quality of life, it goes to every part of who you are as a person, like you mentioned, as well as your family, your relationships at work, your relationships with your children. It affects everything. It's something that we always talk about when clients come in. One of the things that insurance companies constantly try to do, and I think it's wrong, is they try to equate whatever your losses are to whatever your medical bills are.
Right.
And your non-economic damages, your loss of quality of life, pain and suffering damages, are completely different than medical bills, and in much ways, the biggest part of your case.
Right. Right. I mean, just because a fracture might be cheap to fix versus, say, a ruptured disc in your back, doesn't mean that what you lost in terms of pain is any less. I mean, the cost of repairing the injury is just that, just the cost of repairing the injury. The loss to the rest of your life is individual to you, and really doesn't bear any relationship at all to the medical bills.
No, and for example, like a broken rib, medically speaking, there's not much you can do about it. So the medical bills would be extremely low, if any. But the pain and suffering you have for several months, it affects everything you do. And speaking from knowledge, playing sports, I broke a rib, and it was 3 months of just excruciating pain.
How'd it feel to sneeze?
Or to roll over in bed or try to get up. It was brutal. But the medical bills were essentially nothing. There's nothing they can do for it.
Right. Well, it's similar with traumatic brain injury. You get a concussion. There's not a lot a doctor can do for you other than tell you to lay down in a dark room and try to manage it. Well, imagine having to lay in a dark room for months on end.
Right.
Your medical bills might be $1,000.
But think about it, your future quality of life.
Right.
It affects your cognitive ability, how you can function at work if you can still work,
right.
And loss of identity if you can't work. Also affects your ability as far as emotional state. A lot of people that have traumatic brain injuries are no longer emotionally the same person. Medical bills wise, there's not much there. But how it affects your quality of life, not only in the past, but in the future, it's devastating.
Yeah, now you mentioned something in that instruction. It's not only the pain and suffering that the injured person has suffered before the jury reaches its verdict, but it's also in the future.
Right. And so, yeah, you look at it in stages as far as from the date of the injury to the date of settlement or verdict. That's referred to as past non-economic damages, which is sometimes could be a year or several years. But for someone that's 20 years old, 30 years old, the huge part of that loss, the non-economic loss, the human losses, is what's going to happen from the date of settlement or verdict into the future.
Right.
That's part of something else a jury is charged with as far as evaluating and appraising what are those losses, what are those human losses.
It's one of the harder things a jury has to do, and one of the harder things we do as lawyers. But, I know people, some of whom aren't even clients, they're just friends, that will say something like, my neck has not been the same since that car accident. It's been 15 years, and I've never quite gotten back to exactly where I was before that accident happened. These injuries can be life-changing, sometimes in major ways, and that's usually pretty easy to evaluate, but sometimes in small ways. Sometimes it alters the way you get dressed every morning. It alters the way you carry in groceries from your car, because when you're in pain, it alters everything you do.
Right.
You can still do it, but it alters it.
Sure, and I think a lot of people think of pain and suffering as non-economic damages, but it's much more than that. It can go to loss of quality of life, embarrassment, frustration, humiliation. Even we talked about loss of consortium, which is how it affects you with your relationship with your spouse, which in many ways can be dire. As well as, things that you're passionate about in life. A lot of times when people are injured, they can no longer do the things that they love doing on weekends or when they get off work because of those injuries.
Right.
Those are all non-economic losses.
So when you're looking for evidence of a non-economic loss, tell the folks what we do to kind of develop that part of our case.
Sure, that's a question we often get with clients that come in is how do I talk about this, or how do I prove this up? The first things we do is everyone has a circle of influence or circle of friends. So we always talk about who's your spouse, your husband, your wife. What's your children's names? Who's your family members as far as father, mother, grandparents, and then you start looking as far as friends, neighbors, relatives, coworkers, bosses. Those are the people that you spend time with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis for years and years out. And those people often can, when we talk to them, can say things as far as how they were before this injury and how things have changed since the injury. And usually what it is most of our clients are trying to do the best they can to live the best life they can. But the reality is these injuries have affected them and changed them forever.
Yeah. One of the things we'll do in many of our cases before we go to trial is we'll actually visit our clients in their home.
Yeah.
And we'll actually spend either an entire morning, sometimes an entire day, kind of shadowing them.
Right.
You know, how do you navigate your day? How do you navigate your home? How do you deal with the dishes? How do you, make your life move? Sometimes we'll go to work with them if we can. We spend that time with them to get a sense of who they are, because that's really the only way we can know what they've lost.
That's so important, and it's those little things, because sometimes people think that they have to have these big changes. For example, like I always usually hear people talk about a certain sport that they can't do, and in reality is that's important. But what it is those million little things that affect you, that you, like you mentioned, when you go to their house, that you see that they can no longer do or it becomes difficult doing. Right. And it's all those little things, all those little seconds and minutes and hours and weeks and months living your life with those limitations and pains. And again, individually, it's not much to talk about, but collectively, it's a huge change in our life.
It can definitely have a cumulative impact on them. And you're right. You talk to those around our clients, and they're usually the ones who will say, he used to be like this, but now he's changed. He's much more irritable. Snaps at me more often than he used to. Many times our clients are unable to sleep for more than a few hours, or sometimes I had one client who could only sleep in a chair.
Right.
I mean, that was destroying his marriage. It was destroying his sleep patterns and making him just not real fun to be around.
Right.
It's hard to watch these things, and we as lawyers try to get them resources so that they can address these issues. But part of our job then is to evaluate that.
Well, and I think and what you mentioned is so important on with the right clients and the right cases, that you do have to spend that time and spend that time, spend that day, spend that week, whatever it takes to really understand what the client's going through. Because like you said, it's all those little subtle things that maybe it's not, that you're not going to realize unless you spend some time with the client.
Yeah.
And that's something that it's so important, I think, in these cases that do, because a lot of times when you ask the client how things have changed, they can maybe rattle off 2 or 3 things, and it's much deeper than that.
Right.
But when you do go to their house and talk to their wife or talk to their husband, meet with their parents, talk to their neighbors, their friends, their coworkers, their bosses, you start realizing how pervasive these losses, these non-economic losses are that have affected them.
Yeah.
And it's much more than 3 things. It's a million little things.
Many times they don't even realize it until you're in the room with them and they're trying to put the groceries away.
Right.
And then they suddenly say, yeah, my back is hurting right now, so I kind of have to do it this way, where I bend at the knees and put the groceries in the fridge, versus how I used to do it when I could just throw them all in there and get done. It's a lot of times they need that assistance in kind of learning how to verbalize it, how to
Right.
explain how they're feeling.
Right, and it's something, and that's why it's so important to not only look at what the injury has done to you from the time of the injury to time of settlement or verdict, but it's so important to look at how it's going to affect you for the rest of your life.
You've been listening to Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we ask you to take a second look at the world of personal injury law. I'm Matt Glenn alongside Dan Grimm. We've been talking to you about non-economic damages today, and we'll be back in segment 2 with some real-world examples from our cases and our clients.
Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Walls are very proud of the results they obtain for their clients, but you should know that past results afford no guarantee of future results, that every case is different and must be judged on its own merits, and that the choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. And now, back to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn.
And welcome back to segment 2 of Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we ask you to take a second look at the world of personal injury. I'm Matt Glenn alongside Dan Grimm. We're from Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolz. And we've been talking today about non-economic damages. I always say in the context of damages, a good way to evaluate it is, if your home was broken into and thieves took stuff, you would look everywhere in your house. You'd look in your kitchen, your basement, your attic, to try to find everything that was taken from you. You wouldn't simply look at, the valuable stuff, the silver or crystal or whatever, and the stereo. You would look at everything. And personal injury is like that. You don't just want to, fix the injury. You want to get yourself back to where you were when the day before this accident happened. That's what you're entitled to.
Absolutely. I think the same thing is if, I always think about if, and most people wouldn't have an issue with this, say that a startup company went to the bank and got a loan for $10 million. And the startup company eventually defaulted on the loan. And the bank obviously went after the startup company because they expect to get paid back their $10 million.
Right.
I think most people wouldn't have an issue with that. I think what people struggle with, and they have a hard time evaluating or appraising the damages when it's pain, suffering, lost quality of life. But when you put things in context, I think that like your example about the house, it makes sense. I often talk about, there's a museum that had priceless works of art in the museum, and the museum caught fire. And so the fire department shows up there, and the museum's, ablaze. And he goes inside there trying to do what he can to put out the fire, but realizes it's just too far gone. He looks on the wall, and there's a priceless work of art on the wall. But on the adjacent wall, there's a visitor in there that's stuck in there, stuck by the fire. And he can only has time to save either the piece of artwork or get the visitor out safely. Well, cut to the scene where he's coming out and he's carrying the little girl, the visitor that was stuck in there, out safely for the museum that was getting ready to go down a blaze of fire. Right. Well, this priceless work of art is worth $40 million, and he made a decision to save this little girl. What's it tell you about what the value of human life is worth? Yeah,
and in wrongful death cases, which we handle a lot of, that can be one of the more difficult things to put a monetary value on. You're required to do it. That's what the law says, that you must compensate people for human life, but how you value a human life. I mean, it can be difficult. I remember hearing about one case where a drug had been manufactured and distributed, and one of the side effects, they didn't realize this when they distributed it, they should have, was that it could kill certain people. And it killed this individual. And at the trial's closing argument, the attorney made the point that, when they released this drug, they threw a party at the corporate headquarters, and the budget for that party was $1 million. Now, he should have had 30 more years of his life with his wife. He should have lived another 30 years with his wife and his kids and his grandkids. You can't tell me that a year of that man's life isn't worth the same amount as a party. And it was powerful. He got that verdict. But of course, it's not always death. I had a friend in college once who he grew up to become a doctor. Right? He became an orthopedic surgeon, which takes years. I don't know how long medical school is, but then there's residency, and then you have to go through the certification process. We're talking about 10 years worth of work that he put into becoming an orthopedic surgeon. And that was part of who he was, and that was how he provided for his family. That's how he gave opportunities to his kids, was working as an orthopedic surgeon. He got into a car accident, and it wasn't a terrible accident, but it fractured his wrist and caused nerve damage in his hand. Well, suddenly he couldn't operate anymore. Right? Everything he had done, every right decision he had made to set his life up in such a way that he had security and that he was able to provide for his family, in that moment, it's gone. And it's really easy to put a monetary value on his lost wages, but how do you put a monetary value on him changing who he is as a person?
That's right.
Right? I mean, he is 40-something years old, and suddenly he's not who he was before.
Right.
And that has an impact on his spouse, that has an impact on his kids, has an impact on those he used to work with and still does work with. It can be for him, it's a very life-altering injury, and that'll follow him the rest of his career.
No, that's one of the non-economic harms I hear quite a bit when talking to clients. Is you talk about loss of identity. Mm-hmm. With loss of identity also comes isolation, mm-hmm. because no longer are you able to associate with people that you were able to associate with before, because most people just run around in circles of, whether it's your hobby or your passions or your career. Well, when you're removed from that because of these injuries, often hear clients talk about what they feel isolated, they feel alone. And that is, I think a lot of us have gone through this pandemic we went through with COVID, can truly appreciate what isolation is like, because in a way, right. A lot of us were removed from our normal day-to-day lives.
Yeah, to a large extent. And, what many times we ask the question, like, what is your hobby? What is it that makes you you? And we get a lot of people in Southeast Missouri who'll say, well, I love to fish. I absolutely love to fish. Our partner Mike Ponder is one of them. Absolutely,
He's a great
loves to-
fisherman.
He is.
He is.
And he'll if he has a jury trial and it lasts 2 weeks, I know I'm not going to see him in the office the week after, and I know where he is. He is fishing. He is by himself fishing, and he is doing absolutely nothing else. And when he comes back, he's then ready to work. Without his ability to do that, without his ability to go fishing, he's not Mike Ponder, right? He's just not that person. And so when we have a client who can no longer go fishing or no longer go hunting, one of the questions we ask is, let's do an experiment. I want you to give up your favorite hobby. I want you to give up the thing that you use to unplug and recharge your batteries. How much do I have to pay you to do it?
Right.
For me, it would be jogging. How much would somebody have to pay me to give up running? And it's a lot. It's an awful lot of money. I wouldn't do it for $5,000. I wouldn't do it for $10,000. My wife would do it for $50. Right. But that's her. She has other hobbies. So you ask that question. How do you evaluate it? A lot of times you put it in the question of, okay, what would I have to pay you to never do that again?
And that's a great question, because the idea is the appraisal or the valuation of the loss is what is to that person, that victim, that plaintiff that can no longer do that. Because a lot of people may say, well, fishing, I don't see the big deal about fishing, or whatever the loss is. But it's not what is the loss to you, the juror. It's what the loss is to the injured victim that can no longer do what they love to do, or the loss of quality of life. For another example, think about, well, if someone had a horribly broken leg, and say it was Jeff Bezos, who's worth $1.6 billion. And then you have a homemaker, same thing, has the same horribly broken leg. The idea is that, so Jeff Bezos because of the leg, he was not able to go into the space shuttle because he couldn't pass his physical. Well, what would that loss be to Jeff Bezos? It's probably huge, because that's something he wants to do. But a homemaker who can no longer be with their kids, do the things with their kids, play with their kids, take them on walks, take them in the stroller, that's her loss now because of her horribly broken leg. Well, a juror is not supposed to make Jeff Bezos' loss worse because he's worth $1.6 billion and the homemaker's not. Right. It's what that loss is to that individual. And I think a lot of times we get questions like when we talk to people, they think, well, what are they making, or what's their wage loss, or what their medical bills is. Non-economic damages is a loss that's unique to that individual.
Yeah. And I think the COVID example is a great one. What will we have to pay you to go back to March 17th of 2020?
Right.
To live the 4 to 6 months after that, or a year after that, however long you were isolated. I know people who are still hesitant about going out because they're old and they have health issues, and they know that COVID is something that could really impact their life. But I wouldn't want to sign up for another 6 months like that, or another 3 months. I think we were shut down here in Cape for about 2 months. It was awful to me.
Right.
It was just, I didn't enjoy that at all. And that would be expensive to get me to sign up for that.
Yeah, you hear about people that often have injuries that create, loss of mobility, loss of movement, loss of freedom. That the biggest thing they talk about is the inability to be the person they were, to be with their friends. And again, it's that isolation that really, it's something that you don't think about until it's happening to you.
Right.
But yes, go ahead.
No, it comes up a lot also in cases where we have like physical scarring, like where you get a young person who, many times, the windshield will shatter, or they may go through the windshield, or they may just hit their head on the dashboard. And a lot of times there's disfigurement there to young people, and that can be one of the things that I know you've dealt with those cases in TBI cases and things like that really have a lot of non-economic damage.
Well, and as we talked about before, we do what's called NDD, which is a end-distracted driving program that we do a presentation at local high schools. Mm-hmm. And one of the videos that we talk about and shows it breaks my heart, and I'll probably start crying talking about it. But as a young girl, same thing, that she was hit by a distracted driver. Beautiful young teenage girl, and caused horrific injuries to her face. Went through multiple different surgeries. Suffered a TBI because of it. Mm-hmm. And her medical bills were a part of the case. But the biggest loss to this young girl is what you mentioned, as far as the facial scarring, the disfigurement, the TBI, the fact that, I mean, because of her cognitive damages, I mean, her brain injury, how to affect her emotional responses, it forever changes the girl's life for the next 70 years of her life. I mean, she's only 16 years old. So, she had probably another 70 some odd plus years to live. And those are something you look at is like that these injuries they're just life altering. When you talk about TBIs, facial scarrings, things of that nature that to such young people, 70 years, 70 years.
Yeah, I remember reading about a case that came out of Tennessee where a young woman they missed a diagnosis of breast cancer because they didn't do a scan when they should have, and she didn't find out that she had the cancer until she was pregnant with her daughter, and then they couldn't treat it without harming her daughter. So she gave birth, and by the time she'd given birth and they started treatment, the doctors told her, this is terminal. We can do all the treatment we can do, but you don't have more than a few years. And the way the attorney phrased it, he said, we live since kindergarten. We have all known that one day we're going to die. And we live our lives moment to moment. And everything that you can do right now, you take it for granted until it's taken away from you. And he said the reality for this young woman is for the last 2,350,000 moments, she has lived her life knowing that her husband will grow old without his wife and that her daughter will grow up without her mother. And that's the reality every moment of every day for them. And, that I can't imagine living life that way. But that's when you live your life moment to moment and every moment is changed, you think about all the things you take for granted in your life that you can do, and all of it suddenly is gone, or all of it is suddenly changed, or all of it suddenly causes pain. You realize how lucky you had it, how blessed you were, and that can give you a sense of the value of what's been taken, even though it's non-economic.
And that's what you mentioned earlier before about why it's so important to do those home visits, go to your client's home, because it's not only your client that it's affecting, his injuries, his losses, his harms works outward to affect the spouse, affect the children. And those are things that are so important that unless you're there in the moment with them, you have a hard time fully appreciating the devastation that these injuries cause. Yeah,
and this particular young woman, the attorney went and actually met with her pastor. Her pastor was the third person she called after she got the diagnosis. And after she started treatment with the chemotherapy, she had lost all her hair and she hadn't had a chance to get a wig yet. And she hadn't gone to church for a couple of weeks. And the pastor called her up and said, we'd really love to see you. We'd love for you to come back to church. And she said, I just don't feel good about going outside right now because I don't have my hair. And he goes, just throw a ball cap on. Just throw a baseball cap on and come on in. And she did. And when she got there, everyone in the sanctuary had a baseball cap on. All 500 people. It was just amazing. You don't get that story without talking to the pastor, talking to everyone in her life that was going to be impacted by her loss.
That makes me think that just like most of our clients, they do the best they can. They try to make the best of a bad situation. Yeah. And just like her, she's doing the best she can to go out, go to church, put that ball cap on. Because most of our clients, they want to keep going on and live the best life they can.
They can. None of our clients have ever said to me, you got me enough money. I'm happy that I went through this experience. Every single one of them would give back every dime if they could go back to the moment before the accident and have it not happen.
If they could push a button, get into a time machine and go back, you're right. Everyone would do that in a heartbeat.
Yep. So you've been listening to Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we ask you to take a second look at the world of personal injury law. For Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn and all of us at Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolves, thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn. If you have questions and need answers, contact Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolves today. Just go to cbpw-law.com. See you next week for Tell Me I Have a Case. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and shouldn't be based solely on advertisements.